Today on the Young Leaders in Tech podcast, we have Declan Goodman, who is a technology and neuroscience of leadership consultant. Declan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here.
So to start, I'll give you the floor straight away. What is the neuroscience of leadership and why should my listeners care about it?
Yeah, well, it's an exciting area for me, neuroscience of leadership. So, look, I've been in tech for about 20 years, and I've worked across a whole wide different set of roles. And what I find is there's lots of talk about leadership and talk about getting better performance out of teams, etc. And there's lots of different models out there. What I learned over the last about 10 years is that to be a good leader, you really need to start with having greater self-awareness and awareness of your own brain. And it's our most important organ. It's been around for many as evolution evolved, we've learned how to deal with different type of things like threats versus rewards. So what I did was I looked into the whole area of leadership development, enhancing teams, enhancing individuals' performance, and I took a science angle to it. Sort of comes from my university days. I did artificial intelligence. I wrote some software code to mimic the brain, how the brain works. And effectively, our brain really works on the basis that it tries to self-regulate all the time, keep itself lean and efficient. But at times, our emotions get in the way, and they get in the way of how we think and how we make decisions. So neuroscience of leadership is about taking a self-aware approach to applying your own understanding of your own behavioral traits, what motivates you, what threatens you, how you react to those type of responses, and then applying them in your everyday leadership to be a better leader.
Yeah. So just based off that, would I be correct in saying that knowing yourself better is a key part of this?
Knowing yourself better, for sure. And it's also, I'm a fan of Eastern wisdom as well. And one of the old sayings is, to know others well, you have to know yourself well. And it's really important that because different people respond differently, to different situations. And when you're in a leadership role, like if you know things about yourself, so if you know that in general, your default behavior is you're highly agreeable, okay, which is a good trait as a leader. But at times, if you have to make difficult decisions, bringing everybody on board and facing confrontation can actually be difficult for you if you're highly agreeable. So knowing that about yourself allows you to actually reframe the situation, relabel the situation and say, look, in this situation here, if I'm to deliver on my leadership goals, I'm going to have to face up confrontation and I'm going to have to be less agreeable. It's an example of knowing more about yourself can actually help you be a better leader.
Yeah, okay. And as you're an accredited neuro leadership practitioner, sorry if I said that wrong, which as you described as the act of using the neuroscience of leadership to build high performing teams. Can you dig into this a little bit for me?
Yeah. So I'm an accredited Prism brain mapping practitioner. And why I did that was a good number of years ago in Melbourne. I was part of a leadership team. And it was the first time I got exposed to Prism. Prism is a neuroscience-based brain mapping tool. It basically is based on many years of fMRI scans and research. They put people into different situations and they monitor their brain and seeing how do you respond to different type contexts with regards to threat response versus reward response, etc. Because as I said earlier, it is quite important to note that a lot of our thinking is actually heavily influenced by our emotions at that time. So for me, neuroscience of leadership became a passion. I underwent a Prism Profiling, which is an online survey you do. And I'm a certified practitioner now, so I can help people do that. And what you do is you basically inquire a little bit more about yourself, how you respond to different situations. And what you get is a behavioral map. It's effectively an 8-dimension view of what type of activities in your work and personal life energize you and what de-energize you. And actually knowing that is quite powerful. So, for example, tedious, if you will, data-driven type work for me de-energizes me. Doesn't mean I can't do it, John. It just means I won't like or love doing it for long. Whereas working in an area of, say, a bit more around openness, an area around ambiguity, uncertainty, like strategy, which I do a lot of, and architecture, I can handle uncertainty quite well. So me knowing that about myself allows me to map that back into my whole career path to find an actual career that I know will energize me. That's really what brought me into the Prism angle. I'm also at the moment studying for an advanced diploma in Neuroscience of Leadership with Neurocapability out of Queensland. That's actually quite powerful as well, because we're looking at what's called psychological safety. What this is all about, John, is most people working for your organization are going to be smart. That's why you hired them. They're well able to do what they need to do. But what often gets overlooked is giving them the environment, helping them feel safe, giving them the trust that they feel they can actually be, go above and beyond what you're asking them to do. And a lot of that comes down to things like, do they have enough self-confidence in the team environment? Do they know the other team members well? What type of culture is the organization encouraging? And if you look at the big 5 personality traits, if you look at things like openness, agreeableness, extroversion, neuroticism, etc., these type of traits everybody has different varying degrees on. So for me, the neuroscience of leadership came down to, how can I get to know myself better, and how can people get to know themselves better? One thing about the tech industry is tech industry has been underserviced, I believe, in the overall coaching and mentoring industry. There's lots of coaching and mentoring in marketing, in sales, in executive. But when it comes to technologists, we're often, I just believe we haven't had a great amount of tangible leadership uplift frameworks, if you will, or methodologies. And this one, the fact that it's based on science, I think is quite tangible for people.
And if you just mentioned there in the coaching you provide, is neuroscience behind leadership one of the key parts of your coaching, or is it just one piece of many parts?
Well, actually, I'll have to say it's a big part of my coaching. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychoanalyst. I've not taken strength to my clients in those areas. Where I can bring value is I understand tech very well. I work a lot with tech leaders, especially emerging leaders or people moving within their career, either into tech or within tech, moving into, say, management roles or different type roles, going from, say, a business analyst to an architect or a project manager to a change manager, whatever. I understand tech well, and I also understand the science well around what triggers our emotions and what causes us to really, so the prefrontal cortex is about making decisions, right? But we can't really make clear decisions if we've all of this stuff going on in the back of our mind that are affected by emotions, because it actually has been proven that your neuron connections between them, they fire differently. They don't give you clarity when your emotions and those neurochemicals are running through your brain. So it's actually not all that's hard to apply, but one of the things about it is it goes back to just being aware. In this moment, in this meeting, I'm feeling, what am I sensing? What emotions are running through me? One of the things that I say to people is, go and learn about your emotions, learn about labeling, because most people I speak to know about 3 or 4 emotions. That's it. Anger, joy, frustration, stress. Doesn't help very much relabel the situation, reframe it. So what I say to people is, get familiar with your emotions. So if you feel frustrated, why do you feel frustrated? And what's driving that frustration? And it can be everything from a very small remark that someone in the workplace said that actually takes you back to when you were earlier on in life. It might be post-traumatic triggering it. Or it could be something as there's something personal going on in your life and you don't realize it, but you're actually taking it into work. And, people might be responding differently, especially if you're a leader, because, it's proven that 80% of emotions in a room come from the leader, and they're contagious. So if you're stressed coming into a job situation, a meeting, before long, people are going to feel it and they will react accordingly, especially if you're in a leadership role. So it's about knowing what triggers those emotions, identifying the ones that don't serve you well in your job, in your workplace, and then taming them, if you will, taking control. You can actually do that, and it's quite powerful. There's a number of methods which I can go into at some point if you like, but there's a number of clear proven methods to how to do that.
Yeah. So like we're just leading on to that, for people who have no experience in this or possibly hearing this for the very first time, can you explain the benefits of it? Like you've explained some of it already, but how can people implement this themselves?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think it came about as a personal story. I was promoted into a senior IT leadership role, and I was not used to the power and influence of politics and business views. So in other words, I had been in tech all my career. When I stepped into a business leading tech role, I seen how tech is perceived, IT is perceived by the business quite differently to how we internally perceive it. So what I do here is I kind of try to take us out of our, what our own stereotypical view of leadership is, or I should say of what tech is, and try to apply a more objective view to how we're using our how we're using our day-to-day activities to deliver the outcomes we're looking for. So if I was to give some examples, when I was promoted into that role, I realized that previously in my career, I was very much at the pointy end of change. And my role was to bring everybody across by consensus and consultative type role. In the leadership position I was promoted into, it was actually quite a different type. It was more about transformation, and it was more about taking us from where we are today to where we need to be, but there was still a lot of uncertainty. So one of the things that I had to get used to was driving out decisions that weren't always that favorable, if you will, what we would call tough decisions. And for me to deal with that, of course, I found that stressful, because I was used to, myself, I would obviously, confrontation for me was a problem. I never liked it. I still struggle a bit with it, but over the last 6-8 years, I've definitely handled it, I would say 300 to 400% better than I used to. I used to avoid, procrastinate, try to delegate if I could the hard work as a leader. And that tends to not be how to operate as a good leader. So what I learned though was reframing. So one example is if you're in a situation and you're feeling, again, start with your emotional side. What are you feeling? Am I feeling anxious? It could be public speaking. It could be having a difficult, if you will, conversation with a staff member. Understanding you yourself. What am I feeling? How will I project myself outwardly? Get to know the physiological responses to certain emotions. So not only would I, feel, if you're anxious, that is, you might be feeling a bit, you might feel lack of confidence. You might start to be conscious about what you're saying, overthinking it. So what I say to people is try to reframe the situation. Now, reframing is quite powerful. In fact, one of my favorite books, Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning. I recommend that to a lot of people I work with. Basically, it's a dramatic book. It's not an easy read. And I would say it's about a Holocaust survivor. And this Viktor himself was a psychoanalyst. He invented a whole new branch of psychoanalysis out of this. He survived it, but he dealt with the horror and the terrible situation people were in, highly threatened situation. Now, what he learned in all of that is, even in the most difficult situation, when your emotions may well be running high and you may not want to be there and you feel out of control, one thing you do control and can control is your attitude to the situation. This is quite powerful. They say you can break a man, but you can't break a man's spirit. It's very powerful, because what you begin to realize is, before you were letting your thinking brain drive and respond and lead how you emotionally respond to situations. What you can do with Neuroscience of Leadership is identify how you're feeling, spot what's happening, label it, reframe it, so then you can actually apply techniques to regulate, if you will, and take control of your emotions. Doesn't mean you're not feeling the frustration or the stress, but you're not projecting it outwardly.
Yeah.
And you're actually giving your prefrontal cortex, your decision-making part of your brain, a bit of a break to say, okay, I know what's going on here. And I know that, if I don't interject and reframe the situation. So I'm about to give a public talk, say you're a bit anxious about that, or if you're about to have a confrontational conversation with a staff member, or if you're feeling threatened because your manager just says, Declan, I want a word with you in the office at 3:00 with no other context. That can actually throw people right into a threatened state. Whereas someone like me, I would be thinking, well, because I've been in a manager leadership position before, it may actually be nothing at all that's negative. It could be quite positive. So there's a few things that you have to realize, that if you're feeling that anxiety, then you have to apply some kind of reframing to say, okay, well, what am I certain of and what am I uncertain of? So I'm certain my manager, say, wants to meet me at 3:00, or I'm certain that this is going to be a difficult conversation, or I'm certain that I'm going to be late with this delivery. Fair enough. But what else do you have certainty on? It may not well be that certain that it could be, a negative outcome. So it's about just, stopping the mind from imagining, overthinking, slow it down. You can say to your brain, okay, let's focus what's at hand. Another example, if I might just go into, is the overwhelming experience a lot of people have with too much work to do. I have a deadline. I've got 3 days to get it done, or 2 hours to get it done, or a week to get it done, and I just don't know where to start. That's a common one, especially with tech professionals, because it's quite hard to, how long is a piece of string to get some work done sometimes. One thing that I'd suggest to them is, and it's well proven, that there's a concept called chunking, which is breaking tasks up into smaller tasks. It really works. And a lot of people just who never heard of it, when they realize how simple it is, use it all the time. So chunking is, and I found this very powerful, because especially if you're doing something you're not overly energized to do, John. So if you're asked to do a proposal paper or a presentation or something that doesn't excite you terribly much, what you're going to find is you may well procrastinate it. This is how we work. You may push it out a bit, or you may do it with a feeling of frustration because you feel it's going to take a lot of your time. What I suggest to people is, and this is a trick I say to people, start where you want to end up. So the first thing you do with that artifact, that document, is write up the table of contents and just break it up into those 5 or 6 sections that you're going to write. And that's the start of chunking. And then I say to people, set your watch 10 minutes, no more per section. Within 1 hour, they have 6 sections written out. They're not complete, but they're chunked up, broken up. What that does is it puts the brain into a reward state instantly, because you're now starting to see the end game come together. Whereas before, if you were starting with section 1, introduction, scope, project outcomes, benefits, it's hard to see the overall outcome. So chunking is a nice technique, and it also can be applied not just with physical, writing documents and things. You can actually apply it to other activities. Like if you're going into a workshop for the day and you're thinking about, my God, it's a 6-hour workshop. How do you actually chunk it up? So that's another example.
Yeah, so just kind of a bit of a segue there. So in the not so distant past, like the conventional description of an effective leader was one who got results, boosted the bottom line, and generally forced like productivity out of employees. Some of the management practices used to get these results were unfortunately at the cost of retention, motivation, trust, and again the bottom line. With what we're learning about neuroscience, like how is this changing, and can it, for example, promote creative thinking in the workplace?
Yeah, that's a really good one. That's a good question. In fact, I was reading a book there. I might share it after this. I can't recall. About 8-9 months ago, it was a short article promoting a book, but it was about the fact that our work culture, the office environment itself, all came from the factory era back in the Industrial Revolution. the fact that, you know, you have a role, you have a start time and end time, like clocking in, clocking out, and you're given outcomes, measures, and you're told what to produce. We know that the brain doesn't work that well or that efficiently when it's in a situation that's not rewarding. And a situation that's not rewarding tends to be where you feel you're being told to do something and you're not been given ownership of it. You're not been given the opportunity to maybe decide how you want to do it. So a rule of thumb I use to people if you're in a leadership position is, if you have staff working for you or a team working for you, your role as leader is to give them guidance on what success looks like, and give them the values, demonstrate the values of how to get there. How they get those outcomes, you might have a few policies interfere, because that suppresses creativity. You know, if you give somebody ownership of something and say, look, I don't mind how you do it. I actually don't even mind when you do it. I just kind of need it done by this date. So if you want to do it at your own time, whatever. So I find it's a kind of an old philosophy of the more you give away, the more you get back. And what I think neuroscience is good for is the more you realize about yourself that, you know, Declan, for example, I have peak performance times. I haven't spoken about that neuroscience trait, which is something called in the flow, which is where you're most alert, you have clarity, you're not distracted, and you're actually doing something. I don't know, I used to write software development. I used to do software development. I would spend 7 hours just writing a library, say a template library for APIs or something, right? And I would just love doing that. I don't feel like I'm working, and I would get a real flow going. Now, I knew that worked for me from early morning time, whereas I also write outside of technology. I do some writing, and the best time for me to write is actually about 10 p.m. in the evening, because what's happened is my logical analytic brain is relaxing and my more creative side comes through. So knowing that about yourself, what it allows you to do as a leader is it lets you appreciate that of others. So when you mentioned earlier, you know, the traditional conventional approach to leadership, I'd say a learning that neuroscience has brought to the table is everybody's different and people work at different pace, and people work create most creatively when they have what's called the choice to do it. So as a parent, a quick rule of thumb: if you have a difficult toddler or a child who just doesn't want to do something or resists it every time, you know what you do? You don't ask them to do it. You ask them to do one of two things. You give them a choice.
Yeah.
It's very empowering for them. So you say, do you want to have a bath or a shower? Could be as simple as that. Or do you want to wear, you know, shorts or I can't give a good example. Do you want to, but instead of saying do this, you say to them, you have a choice. That's at the primitive side, right? A child's brain, early stage, right? If you take a professional, you can still apply that same type of exercise of freedom. So I would say knowing about yourself. So if I asked you, John, you know, if I said to you, you know, when would you feel would be the best time to deliver some kind of outcome over the next week? Well, you would feel highly empowered to be given the choice. You can do it the weekend, you can do it in the evening, that's time-wise. Or I could say to you, let me know if you need any help or support, which again is empowering because it's giving you ownership, but I'm here to help you. So I think the neuroscience bit is very interesting, because when you appreciate more about how you respond to certain threats and rewards, you can actually project that onto others, and it actually becomes you become, as a leader, you sort of become more focused on providing the trusted environment, the safe environment, and the freedom to your staff, to your team, so that they can, you know, be given choices and they can make those choices and they can be held accountable to those. And you'll find that they'll be far more keen to deliver than procrastinate and not deliver something and then, you know, not actually meet your goals and their goals.
That's obviously going to promote engagement straight away, and creative thinking as well.
Yeah, creative thinking, you know, look, I have some strong views on creativity, though. I'll share briefly with you here. There's been some literature around that, you know, you can teach people creativity. And I don't agree with that, because, you know, you can't teach somebody to be creative. In my view, everybody's creative. And my point is, if people are in the right frame of mind and are given a good enough reward and are given the support they need and a common goal, you will get creativity. But what often happens is cultures, industries, even social guidelines can often prohibit or suppress creativity, and especially when it comes to the individual. So a lot of people I have found, coaching, etc., they never feel the sense of confidence, say, for example, or they feel the imposter syndrome, which I think is effectively, for those who may not know what that is, it's like you feel all of a sudden you're doing something that you're not really good enough to do or qualified to do. Who am I to be in this position when, am I just poor little old me who isn't good enough for this position? That's imposter syndrome, negative talk. You can cut all that back. But one of the things that creativity, I find, and it's been proven outside of tech as well and outside of neuroscience, is that if you want creativity in your team or your own sense of creativity, it comes back to providing the right environment for that. That's quite important.
Yeah. And just onto something a bit more topical. How has the change to remote working over the past 3 months affected your coaching
it's actually quite interesting, that one, because I've always been doing coaching and mentoring and actually consulting as well. A lot of it, 80% of it's been remote, using Zoom and other technologies for about 8 years now. So now that COVID came, it's like, oh my God, everybody's now suddenly aware of how effective this actually is, this type of medium. So I'm finding it quite, for me, it's actually great, I think, because what it's doing is, a lot of people, familiarity and what they're used to, they kind of formulate, that's what reality is, and that's the boundaries of it, what they're used to. When they're forced, if you will, to be broken out of those norms, and they suddenly open themselves. This is with regards to the personality, the openness. Some people are welcoming it, other people may not. But when it becomes a kind of a necessary part of society or work, if you will, like COVID has done, we're quite adaptable. We can, break old habits and build new habits, which I haven't even spoken about. It's neuroplasticity, which is the end game of neuroscience of leadership coaching, really. What that is you can break old habits and break old perceptions and build new ones. And it's been proven that you can actually build new neural pathways in the brain to associate those. The brain never really stops growing, especially parts of it. So what I was just going to comment on there was, with the COVID, there's a couple of things, right? So first thing is, most people are used to getting introduced to other people face to face. And that's what we become comfortable with. And that actually does have, there's positive neurochemicals that get stimulated in our brain when we actually have face to face engagement with people. In absence of that, what we find is the social intelligence is not so accessible. So the social intelligence would be what I would describe as, having an awareness of other people's, if you will, social behavior, social cues, right? And that's really important as a leader. And it allows you to, tap into and detect and have a kind of a heat map, if you will, in how productivity is going in your team, just in how they socially behave. The other two forms of intelligence is emotional intelligence and attentional intelligence, and I haven't spoken about the latter, but I'll just briefly go back to emotional. And so emotional intelligence is really about being quite aware of how people's emotions affect their behaviors and affect their performance. There's social intelligence, being aware of how, interactions at the social level affect their performance. And attentional intelligence is quite a nice term. It's about being aware that what what you're attending to, what you're focusing on in your mind has actually quite a big impact on how you behave. And you can actually switch your attentions. In the book about Zen leadership, there's something really interesting I mentioned earlier about, it's beautiful. There's another book as well, which is called the Zen of Archery. But I haven't even mentioned my fondness of Eastern philosophy, Taoism and Zen practices, but I've actually fused those with my neuroscience of leadership coaching as well. And they actually are not terribly far apart in a lot of cases. So it's like the neuroscience is kind of catching up, to be honest, on what the Zen Buddhists have known for centuries. But one of those things is about letting go of your own perceptions of what might be going on, and letting go of your old habits of, what you expect to happen, and just allowing yourself, to apply a sort of a different approach to things. That is very powerful. In the COVID pandemic we have here, I've seen a lot of people, thrive now with the whole Zoom, because what they realize now is, oh my God, I have access to hundreds of people all over the world now. Now, people like yourself and I who do this as part of our living or hobbies, we knew that anyway. But there's a global type consciousness has been raised that we are all, accessible pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's a wealth of information out there, like we can.
Absolutely. And technology, the reason I'm staying in tech and I love tech is because it's such a powerful enabler. And that's a really good example. I mean, technology is enabling, if you will, us all to get through COVID.
Yeah.
I mean, from a social interaction, from an emotional interaction, and from what we pay attention to, it's quite powerful.
Yeah. And do you use these techniques? You do, obviously, but how do you use these techniques to change the management initiatives of leaders you coach? And can you give me some examples, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of comes down to there's a general approach. So the first thing is, and I gave a talk on this last year. I can't remember how long ago exactly, but about a year ago, I gave a talk on realizing your full potential. And the first thing you have to do is know yourself. So I say it to people, when you walk around an organization's corridors of your building in your office, you see up on the wall a mission statement. You see values. You might even see some roadmaps, etc. Right? I say, where's yours? What's your own mission statement? What are your own values? And what's your own roadmap, your own vision? And I mean that from a career perspective and a life perspective. And a lot of people, Drucker once quoted that you'll never make a hard decision when you know what your values are. It's very true. And when I talk to people, about, becoming a better leader or changing role, whatever, I say to them is, well, the best place to start is yourself. What are your values? What's more important to you? Is fairness more important to you than delivery? Or is, openness as a value? You can say anything, feel free, share with me more, as important to you as, say, something like, trying to think of a good alternative example, openness versus, say, respecting introversion. Some people are introverted. They're not comfortable with expressing things. So which is more important to you? I'm not saying one wins over the other. So I say to people, start with knowing yourself. Start with knowing your what energizes you and what de-energizes you. This is why Prism is a powerful tool to do that, helps you do that. And so, if you know what energizes you, for example, if you like working with data, if you're like a data scientist, or if you like working with people, being a project manager would be a good opportunity for satisfaction. If you prefer to be, working in the uncertainty strategy side, you can actually get that from a tool like Prism. It's quite powerful. Once you know what energizes you, now let's look at what de-energizes you. That means things that you avoid doing, because you may need to improve on those. For you to deliver on your role, you may need to try to, do something that you tend to not like doing, it doesn't mean you cannot do it. It's not related to intelligence or capability. It's just your brain just doesn't want to do it. If it can avoid it, it will. What I say to people there is, let's talk about how we're going to intervene there, and so that you do it less, if you will, painfully.
Yeah.
And how you do that is you use things like relabeling, you use reframing. So reframe the situation. Okay, well, if you don't do it, what's going to happen? Burning the midnight oil in 2 weeks from now, and it's not going to be as good a quality job anyway because you left it so late. Okay, so what we do is we chunk it up and we start breaking it out. Or other techniques as well. You might actually, what I say to people is, it's very simple, is, often, and it comes from an old Taoist proverb, is, often, the most resounding communication is found in silence. And a lot of people I work with often feel they have to talk or say something in a meeting, or they have to be contributing verbally in a meeting. And I say to people, you can contribute 80-90% contribution in a meeting can be listening, and just listening. And I actually had a client there only 6 months ago. She's promoted into an IT leadership role, and she had, on 3 occasions, just felt this overwhelming need to speak and add something in a meeting. What she learned was, when I was coaching her, introducing this, don't speak unless, you really feel it's going to add value. What we agreed was with her, and she took ownership, is what would be, make a value proposition to her, say, in a meeting. She went to high, powerful, stressful meetings, once every a second week. It was a global affair. What were the values she could apply so that she would have a better understanding of herself? Because what she found was, when she talked, she would get emotional, and there's a lot of stress in the room. And unfortunately, her emotional, how she projected herself, didn't exactly express what she wanted to express. It expressed it a bit differently to how she wanted to do it. So what we agreed was, as a technique, is during the meeting, it sounds very primitive and simple, but I encouraged her to take notes of what she wanted to say, and don't even say it. And at the end of the meeting, unless it had to be said, but she was able to articulate with me that 80% of the things she wrote down, she would normally have said. But she ended up saying the 20% at the end of the meeting. And what she found very satisfying as well was, at the end of many of her meetings, she actually realized people started asking her, what are your comments? What are your views? And if there's one thing that's very flattering, is being asked for your opinion.
Yeah.
And it was the first time she's seen people asking her for her opinion, which she found very, very, empowering.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you asked for some other examples there. I'm trying to just think of practical examples.
Well, there's one
ahead,
that, in a previous podcast, we were talking about how in high pressure situations, be it a sales pitch or a client demo, where you might actually feel a bit anxious or nervous, you can actually trick your own brain into associating these emotions with excitement instead of nerves, like tricky.
Yeah, this is interesting.
That's in the Zen Leader, I think.
Yes, it is.
Yeah,
it is. This is one of the areas that I actually studied and read a lot about Zen before I got into neuroscience, but then I started seeing the parallels. So I started writing to some of these neuroscientists, expressing to them that we should write a book together on Zen and neuroscience. But anyway, just on that one, that's really interesting. I'll give you an example of that with regards to the Zen leadership. Let me just recall it now. I had it there a second ago. You were talking about, yes, here we go. So I give talks. I like to give talks around this whole space. I myself found that I would be quite anxious. I still get anxious, of course, but earlier on I'd get quite anxious about giving the talk. And that actually created stress within me. I'd start feeling it a day or two before. Then I went on to coming up close to the talk. I would be feeling quite stressful. I would actually have, the butterflies, if you will, anxiety in the stomach. That's because we have 2 brains, which I can talk about again, but we have neurons actually connected to our gut, which is why we feel it here when we're anxious or excited. what I found was I struggled with this because I would go through all of this stress, and then when I'd have to go and give the talk itself, I'd be out of energy, almost exhausted having to give the talk. So what I did was I went and I looked deeper into that. And this is where the Zen approach works as well. It kind of objectifies and removes the knower from the known. And it basically turns around and says, well, what's happening here is I'm stressed, right? Because I'm stressed, what that's causing is physiological changes in my body, sweaty armpits, out of breath, feeling overheated, which then sends messages back to the brain that I'm not in good shape. So the brain releases responses to that stress, which actually creates a vicious circle, which raises my heart rate, causes my breathing. So the whole thing becomes escalated. So one thing that I learned, and there's really remarkable research done on this, and as a talk I'll share later, a TEDx talk, which I'd recommend, was this woman did studies on this, and she, along the same lines, said that she did a study, I think over 20, 30 years of people who dealt with stress. And one thing they found, this is hands down brilliant, is that it isn't stress that kills people, or it isn't stress that makes people ill, right? It's their mindset and attitude about the stress. This is really powerful. And what you have to realize is stress is a good thing. It keeps us alive. That's the primitive driver behind stress. It's known as effectively there's something inside our brain called the amygdala. And all it does is just looks for threatening situations. And we can't control that. It's our primitive brain. But what we can control is our attitude towards that feeling of stress. So how I look at it is this: if I'm going to give a talk and I'm feeling anxious and I'm feeling the adrenaline, I turn it around and say that's good. Because that's going to drive me to be pumped. I'm going to have a lot of energy running through me. I'm not going to waste that energy on worrying about what if something goes wrong. I'm going to turn that energy into, I'm human, I'm a normal guy, I'm like everybody else, and I'm anxious. Fine. But because I'm all feeling this way means that I'm actually doing something that's going to be of benefit. So in other words, the best things you do are not always that easy. And if I'm anxious about giving a talk, I think that's good. Not just for me, but for the listeners. Because, I wouldn't want someone to come to a talk. I mean, I wouldn't want to go to a talk where the person who's speaking pretty much feels nothing. Yeah. They're just going to go in and talk about to me, there's no passion there. There's no drive. So how I do that is it's an example of reframing, turning that stress into a positive thing. And similarly, you can do it with work as well. If you feel stressed in work, what I suggest to people is find out what's really stressing you. Now, there could be reasons that, could be helped. So, for example, I'm not going to talk about the negative aspects of that. So, for example, I'll just mention them. There could be, you may not be getting the support you need from management. You could be given completely unrealistic deadlines, or you could be given, unclear objectives, all of these things. But my point is, what we do with coaching is we go through, okay, you feel stressed. What are you certain about and what are you uncertain about? And you break it down. And what you end up finding is you're actually stressed about nothing in essence directly related to the task at hand. You're actually often stressed about perceptions or possibilities that might not come through. So that's why the Zen is very good, because Zen brings you back to the here and now. It's really about this whole mindfulness. And what that does is, what I say to people, and there's a great speaker, Brown, out of the US, he used to say it to people, he's a motivational speaker. He said, there's absolutely nothing to stop you to take what you have right now, start from where you are, and start to make a positive difference. And I say to people, yes, you might be stressed about a huge deadline coming up or a huge amount of work coming up, but what you have right now, and if it's not now, maybe later on this evening or maybe tomorrow, what you do have is the potential. Just clear the path, give yourself the environment you need, treat the stress as a positive thing. It's going to drive you to, because stress drives you to attentional intelligence as well. It lets you focus on what's at hand and, chunk it up, break it up into smaller pieces, and it can actually serve you quite well. So reframing, I think, and bringing it back to the here and the now, the moment that you can actually do something about. So that's, that's a big area for me of that. that I find with clients when it comes to coaching is that people just don't realize that, all of the emotions they're feeling and all of that are not actually there to block them from being successful. They can actually turn them into an opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. If you found that this helped you in any way and might help someone else, it'd be great if you could like, subscribe and share it on any of the social medias you're involved on. We do have a website at youngleaders.tech where you can find links to all of our social media accounts. There you can also listen back to other podcasts, meetup recordings and have a look at our reading list where we have a list of books, podcasts and blogs that have been recommended by our speakers. I'm always looking for new speakers as well, so there's a contact form on the website where you can send speaker recommendations if you know of anyone that would be suitable. Again, thanks for listening and I hope you come back to the next episode.